everyone. Thanks so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Gabe Lawrence. I'm an associate here at Jumpstart. I'm joined today by Roman Kalista, the CEO and co-founder of RX Diet. Today, we're going to be talking about chronic kidney disease. More specifically, we are going to be talking about how nutrition can be used to slow its progression and how Roman is working to make medical nutrition therapy more accessible through his company, RX Diet. So before diving in, I want to give everyone a brief overview of the structure. So for the first 30 minutes, I'm going to be asking Roman a few questions. And then for the final 10, 15 minutes, I'm going to open it up to audience Q&A. So please make sure to type any questions you have for Roman into the chat, and we'll make sure to get to them by the end of the webinar. So with that being said, Roman, thank you so much for joining us today. Could you please introduce yourself and what you are working on with RX Diet?
Absolutely. So my name is Roman Kalista. I am a medical doctor, and my background is in technology, data science, where I've been working with machine learning and AI methods for over 6 years now, and also applying those in clinical research during my studies at medical school. So I've been working in immunology research. I've been working in child leukemia research. And after my studies, I did not transition into clinical medicine, but rather started working in tech space. First in pharmaceutical industry, where we built the first transparent drug pricing database in Europe. And afterwards, we started working on RX Diet, because we've seen a great disparity between what we can really achieve with diet in clinical studies and what is actually being done in real clinical practice. So we've analyzed the problem very deeply, and we've talked to patients, we've talked to researchers in this space, and we figured out that the problem really isn't our lack of knowledge about nutrition, but it really is in the right application and working with patients to apply medical nutrition therapy in real life. So we found out that the problem really lies in helping patients get the right products and plan the right meals and help them outside of the clinical scope to really adhere to medical nutrition therapy. And this is why we started RX Diet, because we also found out that this entire problem is extremely complex, and we've tried to analyze it and represent it in a mathematical equation. But it turns out that this equation is so complex that it is impossible to compute in a reasonable time frame. So normally it would take about 3 years to develop the right meal plan for a patient and automatically select the right grocery products for the patient and have them delivered to their house. So we've designed an AI that is able to solve these large combinatorial equation. It's based on a theory published in 2018. So it's very cutting edge new technology that allows us to solve these problems. And we've applied this AI to really bridge the patient adherence barriers and help providers directly prescribe the right medical nutrition therapy, and patients directly receive the medical nutrition therapy without the steps in between that cause the big drop off and the big problems in patient adherence. And currently we're an early stage company, and we're starting to work with companies in CKD space specifically. And the reason for that is that we're seeing the lowest adherence rates with CKD patients because the diets are the most complex and non-intuitive diets in medicine. So this is the reason why we're starting there.
Great. And so could you let the audience know what exactly is medical nutrition therapy, and how does it actually work to slow the progression of CKD?
Absolutely. So medical nutrition therapy is a series of patient interactions where we're trying to implement the right nutritional habits with the patient. So the first step is usually consulting a provider such as dietitian, a registered dietitian, and she will try to educate the patient. And then there are follow-ups and our attempts on building the habit, building the adherence. So, it is not very well defined, but by reimbursement, it is basically the consultation with the dietitian, also, augmented with some additional resources that can be reimbursed as well. But, the problem, of course, is that we don't see it implemented very well in clinical practice. And, how medical nutrition therapy relates to CKD is in that we know that CKD is largely influenced by diet, especially because the main causes for CKD are high blood pressure and type 2 diabetes. And both of those conditions are very responsive to right dietary therapy. And therefore, we can then influence the progression of CKD as well. So in several studies, we've seen that we can stop the progression of CKD completely over a 10-year period with the right medical nutrition therapy.
Got it. And so does the optimal diet depend on the stage that CKD is in? And if so, could you explain how diet should change depending on what stage the disease is in?
Absolutely. So most definitely the diet changes throughout the course of CKD, especially from stage 4 to stage 5, which we call an end-stage renal disease. So throughout the stages 1 to 4, we're seeing a gradual decline in kidney function. So first, usually in stages 1 to 3, patients do not know they have any type of kidney damage because they don't see any symptoms in their day-to-day life. So the disease is silent. First symptoms start to appear in about stage 3 to 4. And that's usually where we find out, that's usually where patients are diagnosed. But we're seeing patients go straight into end-stage renal disease, and we call these patients, from the street, as we call them in practice. But we see patients going straight from being non-diagnosed to dialysis. And the diet reflects all these stages. So throughout the stage 1 to 4, we have a specific goal of keeping the kidneys healthy, because in research it shows that if patients are still maintaining their kidney function, their survival rate is much higher than on dialysis. So what we're trying to do in stage 1 to 4 is really maintain the kidney function and eat the diet that is very suitable for kidneys, such as low in protein, high in complex carbohydrates, low in saturated fats and cholesterol. And we're trying to maintain the function. In stage 5, our goals become very different. So stage 5, end-stage renal disease, is all about survival. So we're doing the exact opposite, actually. So we're trying to pump as much protein into our patients as possible. We're trying to increase the calories, because high body mass index on dialysis means higher survival rates. So that's where we really focus on diets that can improve the albumin levels in patients' plasma, and where we're trying to build the patient mass, because we're then fighting with lack of enjoyment of food, lack of hunger, and really sickness, and patients are not willing to eat very much. So that's really where we're kind of battling these symptoms and trying to make patients eat more of the right foods.
Got it. And so is the optimal diet for each stage of CKD, is that set in stone, or is it constantly updated as we get more information around the science of nutrition?
Absolutely. So of course, it's as in any other field, it's constantly updated, of course, and it's generally based on nutritional science being very non-exact and very difficult to kind of derive concrete outcomes out of our study. So the gold standard for data collection is a patient questionnaire and a dietary data recall. So we have patients filling out information based on their recall, and what we see very often is that patients cheat, and they sort of give us false information in the questionnaires as well. So there's very little we can say definitely in nutritional science, but we're definitely seeing a very base of the diet that remains the same, which is not using the highly processed products, basing our diet on complex carbohydrates, fruits and vegetables, and removing the processed meats, removing the the processed carbohydrate products and packaged goods entirely, ideally. And that remains the same throughout the years generally. So, even though we do have, somewhat very specific guidelines, what we are able to implement with our patients is very different. So, what we see happening in clinical practice, even though we have the best guidelines possible, our day-to-day work or dietitians' day-to-day work is more of, honing the patient to that core that is somewhat proven and somewhat good, rather than reaching the very specific guidelines for different macro and micronutrients, because that becomes virtually impossible in clinical practice. So, to give you an example, it means, telling a patient, you need to stop eating those hot dogs and you need to start replacing it with, bean burritos or something similar to that. So we don't have really the right tools to currently in MNT to implement the specific guidelines just by talking to a patient, because there are then these subsequent barriers that prevent us from implementing those guidelines, and we rely on the patient to implement them on their own.
Got it. Okay. And so 100,000 new patients are diagnosed with end-stage renal disease each year, in which they require dialysis or a kidney transplant in order to survive. Is this really because medical nutrition therapy isn't highly effective for everyone, or do most people not utilize medical nutritional therapy?
Yeah, so I would say there's definitely traction for medical nutrition therapy, and payers realize that there is a huge need to implement medical nutrition therapy. But what we're seeing in clinical practice is a lack of patient engagement and lack of prescription of medical nutrition therapy. So, for example, from Medicare data for diabetes patients, which are virtually very similar to our CKD patients, we know that only 0.6% of these patients have received medical nutrition therapy, even though it is the #1 step in management of diabetes, the same for CKD, because our goal firstly is do no harm, right? And reach the highest clinical effect possible with our treatment. And the diet fits both of those check boxes. And it is very difficult to cause any type of harm with fresh grocery products that are whole food. So just by implementing the right medical nutrition therapy, we should be reaching also very high effectiveness clinically. But we're seeing low prescription rates and we're seeing low adherence rates. So we definitely need to work on prescribing diet more and finding ways how patients can actually access those recommendations, instead of just being told or being given a flyer in the office, which then is thrown away on their way home. We need to work continuously with each patient, not only 2 to 3 visits reimbursed by Medicare with their dietitian, but having some sort of platform where they can really access the medical nutrition therapy continuously, and when they drop off, they can start using it again and make some progress.
Got it. And so you've mentioned barriers now a couple times that are preventing people from actually utilizing medical nutrition therapy. So could you kind of unpack what are all the different barriers that are preventing patients with CKD from actually utilizing medical nutrition therapy?
Absolutely, and this is the very, very core of the entire problem, is that we are able to tell the patient exactly what they're supposed to eat, but then we rely on the patient to do all the work with planning, or preparing the right shopping list, preparing their recipe plan for the week, and then going actually shopping, identifying the right ingredients. And at the same time, they need to manage their costs, because our patients with CKD, they usually work on a budget. And that plays very closely into food waste, because when they're buying groceries with high levels of food waste, then it of course reflects in their budget, and it prevents them from continuously using the right recommendations over several weeks and months. So really the biggest barriers that we've identified through talking to researchers and patients and our literature review where, in general, 4 groups. First was education, then it was planning the right meals, shopping for the right grocery products, and then managing costs. So how we designed our entire system was that our AI can overcome all those barriers through, overcoming the education, because our system can design the best possible diet based on the dietitian's prescription, and we don't need to go through the entire education with the patient, and we can deliver the right diet directly. Then the next points are with planning. Patients are spending 4 to 6 hours when they're really trying hard, 4 to 6 hours every week to plan their meals for the week and try to get the right nutritional content from their recommendations. And then maybe you have some relatives who can talk from experience, but for example, my mother suffers from CKD, and when she tried to buy the right grocery products to really manage her micronutrient intake and really read all the food labels, she would spend usually 1 to 2 hours in a grocery store, and being very, very hopeless at the end, because even if you do everything right, then there is a question of budget, right? Because you buy all the right products, you put them all into cart, you plan your recipe, but your cart is full with maybe 100 items, and then it gets very expensive week over week, and you create a lot of food waste. So our AI is actually capable of incorporating all of those problems into a large mathematical equation and optimize not only nutrition, but also connect to retail outlets online, analyze the grocery products, pick the right grocery products, and combine them in such an efficient way that we're reaching extremely low cost, usually under $3 per meal, and near zero food waste with most of our patients.
Great. And so you mentioned a few different barriers there, but even if you can afford the right food, what to eat, the thing that always trips me up is just that final behavior change. How do I actually start eating better? How are you guys really addressing that with RX Diet?
Absolutely. Behavior change is a crucial part of the entire issue. So without motivation on the patient side, we're getting nowhere, right? So we definitely need to during our first interaction, motivate the patient to make the right decision. So we're fortunate enough in the space that we work in currently, which is end-stage renal disease. We work directly with dietitians who do have these person-to-person interactions, one-on-one interactions with the patient. And we do work with them on the right things to say. We're giving out scripts, and we're reviewing psychology literature on creating that first initial motivation. Then it becomes more about maintaining the patient on the platform and addressing the issues that they have. So we do have a chat in our platform where patients can reach out directly to one of our health coaches and dietitians, and sometimes even doctors, and we interact with the patient. And what we found that these interactions and building a community around the condition where patients can interact not only with us but with other patients is absolutely crucial, because the worst possible feeling patient can have during their therapy is that they're alone, which is a hugely demotivating factor, and we see patients drop off. But we've seen exponential increase in adherence when we see patients engaging with our team members or other patients in their group. So we're building these communities into our application so patients can interact and discuss different recipes, different ways to adjust their diets, but still fit the right nutritional content, and different tips for managing their condition inside the platform as well. And it doesn't stop there. We also recognize that patient's family and household is a huge part of their therapy. So we are engaging with additional members of the household and try to motivate them to keep motivating our subject, right? So it is hugely important to keep as many people involved as possible around the patient, and really this way we can reach the best results.
Got it. Okay. And so RX Diet, you guys have a few different potential customers here that could benefit from your solution. top of mind dialysis clinics, providers with any value-based contracts, and obviously payers that want to control costs. Could you walk us through your value propositions to each of those organization types?
Absolutely. So it all comes from looking at our US healthcare system when it resembles this big snowball, and we're just keep adding cost and new services on top. So we're thinking about our approach in a way, how can we actually remove some of the burden out of the healthcare system, and we're really fond of value-based contracts. So we're always trying to incorporate a value-based component into our contracts. And different organizations have different, of course, different use cases and different incentives. So for example, with payers, our goal there is really to decrease their expenditure per patient with specific conditions. So for example, with CKD, we're targeting that high blood pressure and diabetes, and hopefully saving around $3,000 to $4,000 per patient per year. So our goal is really to then capture part of that value through our deal, but generally create cost savings for both the system and the patient. With providers, the models are somewhat different, where providers do benefit from patients surviving longer and receiving their care, and also decreasing the cost per year to the payer, right? So they can receive also some incentives from the payer on their value-based contracts by working with us.
Great. Well, perfect. I appreciate it, Roman. That is it on my end for questions. We do have a question that came in on the chat. And if anyone else on the webinar has any questions, feel free to add them to the chat now. But the question in the chat is, are there patients of particular cultural backgrounds that respond better to your approach?
So I would say not currently. We do not track patients' ethnicities. We do offer different ethnic diets, although we do not collect medical data, so we do not have that specific information about our clients. But we do target. Our approach is based on the population and the condition that we're working with. So, for example, with CKD and ESRD, we know what our population looks like. The low income levels and the low education levels, and the ethnicity of higher levels in African American communities. So we do adjust our diets and our recommendations to these populations, and patients on the platform have an option to choose what they like and what they prefer.
Great. And so we just had another question come in. What is your view of packaged medical foods from major medical food companies?
I would say it depends always. So some products are very good, some products not so much. So it always depends on the product. But we're not against using meal replacements, for example, that did show and are evidence-based and do show clinical effect with our patients, and they're always much easier to implement with patients, but they're also much more expensive.
Got it. And so she follows up, what makes the products good? What makes them not great?
Yeah, it's always the nutritional content and how they reflect the latest science. So we do see products that focus on one specific component. So for example, I've seen products labeled suitable for renal patients or dialysis patients, but they only focus on the protein content, but not so much on the phosphorus content, for example. And even the phosphorus was from animal-based sources, which is of higher bioavailability, for example, compared to phosphorus from plant-based sources. So these companies need to do a proper research into what these patients actually need. And of course, I do see larger companies doing the right research, but then it also reflects in the price. So we need to find a good middle ground where we can implement this with the low income population and have them adhere to his diet.
Got it. All right, so we have a couple of questions coming in different places now. So how do you deal with perverse incentives in healthcare that motivate some stakeholders to do things that not necessarily are in the best interest of the patients?
Absolutely. This is very prevalent in our US healthcare, and what we are doing right now is we're working with providers where our incentives are aligned. So for example, end-stage renal disease providers benefit hugely from keeping patients in good health and alive for as long as possible. So our incentives are well aligned, and their revenue, the customer lifetime value basically is much higher if patients keep surviving for 10 plus years on dialysis. So we are, initially we're picking those providers, but then we're also working with payers. So even the providers that do have perverse incentives should be forced by the payer that they're working with to apply these nutritional solutions and increase the value for both the patients and the system.
Great. And then so someone asks, do patients pay for your program or do you bill insurance or both?
Yeah, so our program is built to be as low cost as possible to both. And patients do pay for their groceries. So we design our meal plans and the groceries that we deliver to the patients to be cheaper than the average US cost per meal. So usually under $3. And from our analysis of what our population generally eats, and when they try to adhere to the right diet, their cost per meals is around $4 to $5 usually. So we're also realizing some cost savings on the patient side. And then the providers or the insurers do pay for our program.
Great. And so someone asks, nutrition is tricky for digital health. How do you approach go-to-market strategy? Who's paying for it now, and who do you plan to have pay for it in the future?
So sorry, can you repeat the question?
So they asked, nutrition is tricky for digital health. So how do you approach your go-to-market strategy? And they want to know who's paying for it now, and who do you have, or who should pay for it in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Nutrition was traditionally very difficult for digital health, and the reason is that there was no transition of that advice into real life, right? So what we're doing is we're bridging that gap and working with retailers directly, so we can supply the right grocery products and create the orders with local retailers and deliver physical products to the patient directly. So there's no need for the education, planning, shopping, and the costs are extremely low for the patient. So this is really the system, how we transition from digital world to real life and outside of clinical advice to what is really happening with patients' diet. So this is how we're tackling the issues. And again, patients do pay for the groceries, and our partners do pay for the program if it creates value for them.
So next question. So what are you doing about adverse childhood events, social determinants of health, and health literacy? How are you building that into your product?
Yeah, absolutely. So we currently do not focus on children. So we do tend to onboard patients 18 years and older, simply for the legal reasons. There's not a problem with science mostly, and the social determinants. We do work with our specific population, and we do listen to their comments. So we work very closely with them, and they do provide feedback on what they don't understand. So we do adjust our communication. We do adjust our plans to fit their preferences, and also cultural diets. So even the religious diets are currently implemented, and different cuisine types as well.
Great. And so next question we have is Is RX Diet available on a national level yet? What is your market saturation and what are your goals?
Yeah, so RX Diet is available nationwide. Due to our connection to Kroger and Walmart, we're able to deliver nationwide to most zip codes in the US. And if we're not able to deliver through those grocery providers, we're able to provide much more actionable advice where either patients can go pick up the groceries at their local store, or they can grab a already optimized list and go to their local store where they used to shopping. So the difference is that normally the list would be 100 items per week, but this list is usually around 25 to 30 items that is combinatorically combined in a way that it creates very low cost and zero food waste.
Got it. Well, great. That's it for questions right now. But if anyone has additional questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Before we wrap up though, I do want to mention that we at Jumpstart have launched a community to network called the Refinery. And so we're bringing all of our portfolio companies, startups that are outside our portfolio and the industry together on one platform to really work together and to collaborate and to network. And as part of this larger network, I've put together a group focused solely on CKD. And so over the next couple of days, you guys should get an invite to join this group. I would love to have you guys in there so we can all network together and keep this conversation going. We do have one additional question. So they asked, do you approach clinical roadmap for CKD patients? I'm not sure exactly what that means. So clarity there. I'll just talk a little bit more about the group that we're forming in the Refinery around CKD. So really our first kind of focus area there is going to be around slowing the progression of CKD that we talked about with Roman today. We're eventually going to hit on other topics as well. But I would love to have you guys join in. Roman just put his email in the chat for you guys to reach out to him. It's roman@rxdiet.com. And feel free, if you have any questions or want to get in touch with Roman, feel free to email me at gabe@jsf.co. Thank you guys so much for joining. Roman, thank you so much for your time today and your expertise. It was incredibly informative. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you everyone for listening, and please feel free to reach out to me at roman@rx-diet.com.
All right, thanks everyone.